Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another Reloading Chat. Today I thought I would chat with you guys about why, particularly for preppers, but I think this can apply in general, why any firearm that you think is really worth owning, that you need to have two of. You need to have two of. And there's a reason for that. And it's because I'm not a big fan of just that cool factor of, oh, I have this one gun, I really like it, I have just this novelty weapon. And it has to do with the mindset of prepping and everything else. So for example, we're just going to use handguns today because I have a lot of handguns right now. So let's take like these Glock 22 Gen 4s. I have these two identical ones. These were police trade-ins. Two identical ones. For a reason, because these are some of my prepping pieces and I got a good price on these. And this is why sometimes you need to be looking at stuff of sometimes, but you can get multiples of it at a good price at times. And it has more to do with other things than just standardization. Now, I will say that standardizing your household, if you're a multi-person household, or maybe you have a family or several friends, you all plan on prepping together. Because again, that's really common. That's very, very common, right? So standardization helps, and then everyone's got multiples of the same firearms, and that helps a lot with all of that. Because again, everyone is then trained on the same weapons, they're trained on the same handguns, the same rifles. You don't have magazine and ammo confusion. It's a good situation overall to be in. When you're going to have multiple people involved in any way, even if it's just you and your significant other, or you and a child who lives with you, or anything else. It is a good idea to have some standardization, but there's more to it than that. And the reason I always say this of why you need two, it's the concept of kind of royalty used to always joke, that you have the heir and you have the spare. That's what it comes down to. What you really need is that you have one that you can do all your practicing on and you can abuse. So if, for example, you get access to some police trade-ins like these, grab two of them. Always grab two of them. And the reason for that is that you have the one that you can practice. You can abuse. You can shoot tens of thousands of rounds if you need to. You can develop a high level of proficiency with that one. You can put wear and tear on it. You can abuse it to the point where either you go trade it or sell it later if you want. Doesn't matter, but the point is you have one that is your shooting gun that you shoot repeatedly. You do all your training on, you abuse it, you find out what its limitations are, and you develop a high degree of proficiency with that weapon. And then you have the other that you only break in. Maybe 100 rounds to it just to get it well broke in. Make sure everything works, everything's working correctly. You develop all your proficiency on the other one because you end up with one weapon that's worn out to some extent eventually after a number of years, and then you have the other version of it which you now have a high degree of proficiency on that is basically new. And if we do have a major end of the world type event or any scenario like that, you basically have a new firearm. So I don't recommend that you really shoot both. This is why a lot of my handguns, people will be like, why do you have two of this, or really similar, why do you have a Glock 21 SF and a Gen 4, it's the same gun. Why did you buy matching barrels for each one? Why do you have these two different barrels? Because a lot of it comes down to, again, having the aftermarket parts that match, having just the one to shoot. Like, I don't shoot my Gen 4 really. I have 100 rounds through it. In that case, I shoot my SF Gen 3. But the same thing with these Glock 22s. When I go over and start shooting a lot more 40, I'm only going to shoot one of them. I'm not going to shoot both of these. I'm going to shoot one. I then have the other as an actual prepper weapon that is essentially a new handgun. Right? It's essentially a new handgun. Has 100 rounds through it. I know it works. So what this lets you do, get used to the one of them, find out what parts break, so you can start seeing what wears over time, and then, obviously get spare parts for the other one. Things like recoil springs, extractors, whatever. Kind of get an idea for the lifespan on them because you have the one weapon that you've put all of your training time in. If you start noticing that you start to get extractor problems at around 5,000 rounds, or the recoil spring starts to wear out or become softer after 5,000 rounds, you know that your main prepping weapon, the newer one, is going to have those issues at probably a similar time. You need to have the spare parts on hand and have those ready to go, and expect that when you reach about that point, you need to swap them out ahead of time. In other words, if you find that on your one Glock 22 that the extractor starts to have problems at around 8,000 rounds, and you have the other one and you have in the kit to go with it, extractor and recoil springs and stuff, that extractor started having some issues at 8,000 rounds. So around 5 or 6,000 on the other one, you would probably swap it out so that you know it's guaranteed to be reliable later in that situation. It allows you to help anticipate some of these things, to gather data for your other weapon while you literally put all the wear and tear on the other one. Right? It's just a good policy to have. And it's a good idea for that. So again, it lets you basically develop proficiency and get a learning curve and gather data for one weapon while you still have the new version sitting in the shelf or stored away. You know, you could have more versions of that sitting in bug out bags or other stuff. You could have it at other places, other properties you own. Now, when we start talking about going into more than that, people say, why did you only mention 2? Because your third one is the one you don't tell the government about. So we don't need to have that in the title. Shh. Shh. Don't worry about that third one. You just worry about those 2 that everyone knows you have. See, that's how it works, guys. You do all your background checks and all the stuff like that on the 2, and then you go do what's without breaking the law. Like I got that third one as a trade, perfectly legal, no laws broken. But there's nothing in any system about it. Now, granted, in Texas it doesn't work that way. Anyways, where I live, they don't keep it long term. So you need to hold on to your receipts in case your firearms get stolen. But hypothetically, they don't keep that long term here. They're not allowed to. But in any event, go back to these 2. So that's the idea. That's the idea. So that you have not only a good situation to standardize your household, you literally put all the wear and tear on one and you have a new firearm at any given time that you've got data on, that you got proficiency on everything else. And it lets you, again, try out new aftermarket components just in case things go wrong. You don't want to be in the middle of a transition of testing parts and different pieces and modifications that you don't know if they're proven for your system or not yet. You don't want to start doing all that on the weapon you're going to be using. So again, if you wanted to test some other stuff out, you can go ahead and test it on the new ones and parts changes, and you leave the other one in the old configuration until you've done some testing and tuning on the throwaway one. Because that's really what it is. It is ultimately a throwaway, right? That's what that first one is for. It's your practice gun, it's your beater, it's your throwaway. And the other is your good one that stays new. And again, I think this works very well. That's what I recommend. It's another reason I always tell people, again, get the most bang for your buck with your prepping weapon so that you can have multiple of any weapon that you have. I mean, H&Ks and everything are nice. They're real good. But, how many of them are you going to buy? Are you going to be able to get all the spare parts? Are you going to be able to keep it up and running guaranteed the way that you can, say, a Glock? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on your budget. Depends on what you have available. That's an individual choice, isn't it? Reason I go with Glock. There's a reason I go with Glock. It has to do with quality for my money. And that's it, so that I can have multiple weapons. I can have them stowed away at different places. I can have spares in case my main weapon breaks. And again, parts availability, components availability. It's all stuff you think about as preppers. But ultimately, again, something that's in a price point for whatever role that you can ultimately afford to have 2 of. It's a real good idea. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.